Dan tackled the living the good life, the idea of the good life. We're continuing through here now. When I was about 5 years old, my family and I went to the mountains for the first time. I grew up on the long plains of Nebraska, hadn't seen mountains before, but I have some memories still of that time. I remember sleeping in a tent. I remember ground squirrels eating our s'mores, and I remember driving with my family up Pikes Peak. If you've been up that road, it is a wonderful road. As we climbed, I began to lean out of my window to look at these tremendous drops that were before us. And 5-year-old me just marveled at these high roads. And I kept saying over and over, wow, that's a long way down. That's a long way down. I remember, though, that my mom wasn't too thrilled. She wasn't very excited. It turns out that mortality hits a little bit different at age 30 than it does 5. And she was a little bit uncomfortable. There were no guardrails on the road, and she wasn't very keen on me continuing to say what a long way down it was. I've returned to the mountains many times since, and driving in the mountains is one of my favorite parts. I love the experience of switchback roads where you're alternating between heading right toward the mountain itself and right out into the wild blue yonder. It's simply wonderful. Simply wonderful. There's just something thrilling about a road that has tamed the danger, but there's still just enough danger to keep you alert. And I think in everyday life, we instinctively know that extremes are dangerous. If we're driving on a mountain road, there's one side that's carved into the side of a cliff. On that side is sometimes a guardrail and sometimes just a mountain. On the other side, there's a rock wall or on the other side, there can be a sheer drop. The rock wall can do just as much damage as going off of that cliff. These days, those kinds of roads usually have guardrails, not to tell you where to drive, but to keep you from driving where you shouldn't. The goal of driving on the mountain, though, is not to hug the guardrail. You don't hook your car up to the side of the guardrail, and you also don't ignore it altogether. The goal is to stay on the road and to safely make it to your destination. Ecclesiastes 7, where we're going to be today, is wisdom for people traveling a road like that. We've talked about life under the sun quite a lot in this series, and life under the sun is not a wide open field. It's not a desert journey where you can drive anywhere you want. Instead, life under the sun is a narrow mountain road. It's dangerous on both sides. And the teacher of Ecclesiastes wants us to see that wisdom is not about finding what feels comfortable to us, but about learning to walk the path that God has set before us without falling into ruin. Wisdom is a road that requires our humility. It requires our submission to its path instead of to our own route. But that path can be treacherous, and wise humility brings us to a place of dependence, joyfully following a guide rather than plunging ahead at our own pace. And ultimately, our big idea for today, as we pursue God's wisdom, our hearts and our lives begin to look more and more like Jesus. Hopefully you're here in Ecclesiastes 7. If you're not, you can turn there. Join me in verse 15. The teacher says, "In my vain life I have seen everything. There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there's a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. Be not overly righteous, and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Be not overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand. For the one who fears God shall come out from both of them." Before we dive into what this section here means, I want to call out what it doesn't mean, because it sounds like the teacher is setting up two men. One is this righteous, wise man, and one is this wicked, foolish man. And it sounds like he's proposing this middle way. He's proposing this middle way. Kind of mix it half and half, it looks like. Be half righteous and half wicked. Be half wise and half foolish. The middle way actually sounds very reasonable in our culture today, doesn't it? Be religious, but don't be too serious about it. Indulge yourself, but not too much. But that's not wisdom. That's not wisdom. That's spiritual compromise. It's not staying on the road. It's taking whatever path we want to, whatever one feels best or seems best to us in the moment. And that's not what the teacher is talking about. He's not saying there's this middle way and you should kind of be half and half. Instead, when the teacher talks about being overly righteous, he's talking about a hyper righteousness. The Bible talks a lot about this. The Bible uses this word self-righteous, self-righteousness. This is the person who hugs onto the guardrail so tightly that they stop trusting the road itself. Self-righteousness says, if I obey carefully enough, if I know enough, if I do things the right way, then God owes me certain outcomes. It sounds holy. Self-righteousness sounds holy. Self-righteousness looks disciplined. But underneath is a fear of being exposed, a fear of losing control, fear that God might not come through unless I manage him carefully. From the beginning, Adam and Eve, sinners, have tried to cover their shame instead of bringing it to God's light. This kind of righteousness, this self-righteousness, it actually doesn't lead to life. It doesn't lead to life. It leads to despair. It leads to anger when the road turns suddenly. The teacher says that this type of righteousness, self-righteousness, will actually destroy you because it's not built on trusting in God to begin with. When the teacher here in this passage warns against being overly wise, he's not talking about true wisdom. Instead, he's talking about the sinful tendency to believe ourselves more wise than we truly are, that we know better than God. I said 2 weeks ago that Pastor Dan preached on the good life. And one of the things that he mentioned is that one of the ways to live the good life, in order to do that, we have to submit ourselves, give ourselves over to God's definition of what it means to be good, what goodness actually is. And in the same way, we have to recognize here that God's wisdom is so far above ours. In life under the sun, in this life under the sun, as seasons come and as seasons go, so comes a temptation. And it sounds like this. It's a temptation to shake our fist in God's face, to say that I would have done it differently, that you got it wrong. I would have made this season different. Or perhaps I would have made sure that this season or that season never happened. This is what it sounds like when we swerve out of our lane, when we say to God, I know a better route, rather than being truly wise. This fake wisdom is actually foolishness because it exalts our preferences far above our understanding, and it makes God out to be our servant. Now, so that's what it might look like to be overly righteous or to be overly wise. It's not true righteousness, is it? And it's not true wisdom. On the other hand, the teacher gives us foolish wickedness. He talks about foolish wickedness. That's the other side of the road. And maybe this part is more obvious to us, what this might be, what foolish wickedness is. But this is the person who ignores the guardrails altogether. They see the cliff, but they assume it's not going to matter. This is actually a very easy place to be because this person looks at the unfairness of the world around us and says, if this is how it works, then I'm just going to do what I want. This kind of foolishness mistakes God's patience for God's absence. It treats mercy as permission, and eventually the drop off the cliff is real. This type of foolish wickedness actually violates God's law. And when God doesn't strike them with a lightning bolt immediately, they decide, I think I could probably do that again. In Psalm 10, David says, in the pride of his face, the wicked does not seek him. All his thoughts are, there is no God. He says in his heart, God is forgotten. He has hidden his face. He's never going to see it. The Apostle Paul says, do you presume on the riches of his kindness and forbearance and patience, not knowing that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance? As we talk about this kind of foolish wickedness, this kind of idea that, well, perhaps God doesn't see, perhaps God doesn't care, I wonder if this identifies with you. And if so, friend, let me just say to you that the patience of God doesn't mean that God doesn't mind. It's not God giving permission to your sin. Instead, it's evidence that God is being kind to you. He's being patient with you so that you might hear the gospel, so that you might hear the truth of Jesus, so that you would turn and repent to him. But the teacher here is, what the teacher does is he puts these two things up side by side with each other. This over-righteousness, fake wisdom, and foolish wickedness. He puts them side by side, not to say that they're the same, but to say that they are both deadly. And then he tells us why wisdom avoids both extremes. He says, the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. This is important. The wise life avoids the error of extremes. The wise life avoids the error of extremes. Wisdom rejects self-righteousness because it's ultimately an empty gospel. It's a fake gospel that can never save. Wisdom rejects pride dressed up as holiness, harshness justified as conviction, and inward anger when God doesn't seem to reward faithfulness. But wisdom also rejects the rebellion of foolish wickedness. The one who fears God avoids the errors of extremes on both sides. And that's important here. That's what the teacher is trying to get to. Proverbs 9:10 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. The wise life is the life that fears God. So let me ask you today to consider this. Are you obeying God because you fear him, or because you're trying to manage him? Are you walking the road in trust, or are you gripping the guardrails because you're afraid to let go? It's important that we begin here. As we've really returned many times over and over in the book of Ecclesiastes and the wisdom literature to this idea of fear of the Lord, that's where the wise life begins. The wise life begins with the fear of the Lord because worship and submission keep us from the errors of extremes on both sides, and it begins to shape our heart, the posture of humility. If you look here in verse 19, the teacher is going to unfold this humility. He says, wisdom gives strength to the wise man, more than 10 rulers who are in a city. Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. Do not take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. And all this I have tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it is far from me. That which has been is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? The wise life, in addition to avoiding the errors of extremes, the wise life embraces humility. Traveling a narrow mountain road has a way of doing something to you. It makes you humble. You slow down. You put both hands on the wheel. You stay alert because you know one careless move can just send you right over the edge. Humility is driving this road with the understanding that I wasn't the one who engineered it. I didn't design the road. I didn't carve the road into the side of the cliff. I didn't set the turns. Instead, I I receive the road as it comes. We adjust ourselves to it. The teacher says first here that the wise person is better than 10 excellent leaders of government. Now imagine that kind of a city. Imagine a city run by 10 excellent leaders. Imagine how that would affect the parts of that city's life. It would, wouldn't it? There'd be jobs, there'd be prosperity, there'd be safety, there'd be security, there'd be order, there'd be structure. The teacher says that wisdom benefits a person more than even these things. But there's a problem. There's a problem. Because if wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord, the problem is that no one perfectly fears God and obeys his commandments. No one can be truly wise because no one is truly righteous. In our pursuit of wisdom, the only way to be truly wise is to humbly recognize our shortcomings and our failings. You and I, we are not as good as we would hope ourselves to be. And so, because of that, we are more wicked and more weak than we can possibly know. To be both wise and humble means that you and I must view ourselves rightly. We must view ourselves according to how God views us. If you're a follower of Jesus, if you're a son or daughter of God, then he views you according to his perfect love and compassion. In the midst of your imperfection, in the midst of your foolishness, our Father sees you rightly and bestows on you his grace. You and I are in constant need of grace. We constantly need grace. We're weak. And we do not yet look like our perfect brother, Jesus. The combination of our failings on one hand and God's faithful goodness to us on the other is meant to keep us humble. Seeing this math that doesn't math keeps us humble. In life under the sun, our wisdom is imperfect, and so that means that growing in wisdom means growing in humility. Now, wisdom, the teacher says, wisdom gives strength, but it also tells the truth about us. No one keeps perfectly centered in their lane. Every one of us at some point drifts toward the extremes that we talked about before. Each of us drifts toward self-righteousness on one hand, or lawlessness and the cliff of rebellion on the other hand. And once we accept that, once we understand that we are prone to wander, we are prone to swerve, we are prone to go toward the guardrail or toward the cliff. Once we understand that and accept that reality about ourselves, it changes how we treat others. The teacher warns about obsessing about the opinions of others. He says, don't take these things to heart. On a dangerous mountain road, you don't swerve every time you hear a noise outside the car, do you? You don't swerve because if you did, you would end up over the edge. In the same way, if every careless word about you or careless word near you makes you lurch in anger or self-defense, you will not walk steadily in wisdom. Friends, much of what you and I consume every day throughout our lives online, it's designed to provoke you. It's designed to make you angry. It's designed to well up within you a sense of self-righteous judgment. But the truth is, the hard truth is that we're no better. We're just as dumb as the dumb people we see. We're just as ignorant as the ignorant people we can't stand. We're no better. Why? How do I know that? Because my heart knows how many times I have cursed others. Humility remembers. I've said things that I regret. I've taken wrong turns too. That's not an excuse for the wickedness around us, but it is humble perspective. Jesus instructs us in the Gospels that before we call out the hypocrisy of others, that we must humbly face our own hypocrisy and repent before the Lord. Calling out our own foolishness, that's wisdom. Consider the words of your mouth. Consider the thoughts and words of your heart this week. Do they match up with wisdom, or do they match up with foolishness? The teacher says, all this I have tested by wisdom. A wonderfully confident statement here. He says, surely I can be wise. And in the next moment, a realization, I can't. I can't do it. I can't be wise. You see, wisdom is like a road that disappears around the mountain. You can see the road in front of you, but you can't see where it turns. That's not meant to paralyze you. It's meant to keep you dependent on the one who knows the whole route. Friends, the words spoken about you, the words spoken about you that truly matter, are the words that come from the mouth of our triune God. And as you listen to his words, the words that he says about himself and the words that he says about you, your heart will be softened toward others as you consider how loved you are in Christ and how great his riches of kindness and grace and patience are toward you. Pride drives like the road belongs to us. Humility knows that we are just travelers, that we're dependent, that we're limited, that we're in need of grace. Only the humble admit that they might misstep. Have you ever thought of that? Only the humble admit that they might misstep in the future and admit how much they've failed in the past. Only the humble listen when wisdom tells them to slow down. That humility isn't weakness and it's not mushiness. It's wisdom. It's what keeps us alive on the road. The teacher throughout this is moving from instruction to confession, for that's where godly humility always goes. The teacher settles into this final section here, just after this, by telling us that the wise life admits dependence. The wise life admits dependence. Here in verse 25, he says, I turn my heart to know and to search out and to seek wisdom in the scheme of things, and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. And I find something more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets and whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Behold, this is what I found, says the preacher, while adding one thing to another to find the scheme of things which my soul had sought repeatedly, but I have not found. One man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all these I have not found. See, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. Eventually, something else is becoming clear. Even humility isn't enough, because even the humble heart can't see the next turn in the road. The teacher has described what wisdom looks like and what foolishness looks like, how to embrace a life that avoids the extreme of errors and a humble heart of reflection. But what we're meant to see is that the teacher is beginning to end up in a place of desperation. He's lost his way and does not know where to go. In his pursuit of wisdom, the teacher has run upon the edge of his own heart. If the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, then what about the reality that my heart wanders off in the opposite direction? Where do we turn when we, like the teacher earlier in verse 23, say to ourselves, okay, I'm going to be wise, and very quickly realize I can't do it. It's far from me. Before we go too much further, though, I do want to call out just how this section seems a little bit confusing, perhaps a little bit offensive or hurtful to you. In just a few verses here, the teacher seems to have a fairly low opinion of women. A fairly low opinion of women, using a woman as an embodiment of something worse than death. That seems bad. And saying that 0 out of 1,000 women are wise. That's not great odds. But that's not really remotely what the teacher is really saying here. That's not what's happening. And so we'll tackle those parts as we go through them. If you were with us in November, perhaps you remember a sermon that I gave on Job 28. And in there I referenced Proverbs 8 and 9. Proverbs 8 and 9. If you haven't read those, highly recommend them. Wonderful passages, excellent imagery. Solomon in Proverbs 8 and 9 gives us a picture of 2 women, Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. Now, both women are going throughout the street. They're standing and they're saying, "Come to my house. Come to my house." Both women have prepared food. Well, both women have food. Lady Wisdom is calling out to the simple. She's saying, "Come over. Come to my house. Have a meal with me." She's saying, "Come, gain insight and live." That's the message of Lady Wisdom. Gain insight and live. Now, Lady Folly, she's also inviting people over to her house, and she also has a meal for them to eat. But it's a meal with cheaper food. In fact, it's stolen food. Proverbs 9 says that those who enter Lady Folly's house don't realize that by going through her front door, rather than life, that house is a place of desolation and death. Lady Folly is the person that the teacher is talking about here in Ecclesiastes. He's saying that to be led away to an unrighteous death is worse than death itself. Now, the other reason that the teacher personifies folly here, again, as a lady, is because foolishness and wickedness are not neutral. Lady Folly is not just standing on the edge of our mountain road waving, right? She's not just holding up a sign. Lady Folly is the loose gravel at the edge of the path. The sudden pull of the tire when we drift too close. You see, if you assume that you are strong enough to flirt with the edge, then when you do that, you quickly realize how she can take hold. Living a wise life means recognizing how vulnerable we are to being pulled into foolishness and wickedness. That we are not smart enough, that we're not strong enough in ourselves to keep from becoming a fool. The struggle to be wise in these ever-changing seasons of life is meant to push us past the point of self-sufficiency. Here's the truth. You don't have what it takes to be wise. The moment that you believe that you can't stumble, that you can't fall, you are walking right into the house of Lady Folly. The wise life admits dependence because the way of foolishness is so well traveled. Most importantly, though, the wise life admits dependence because God created us for righteousness, and we have sought out many schemes. You see, it would be bad enough if the foolish life is just out there seeking to find me. But the more difficult truth is that the desire to reject wisdom and pursue wickedness lives within us. Verse 29 says that God has created us to be upright, that is, to walk blameless and holy before God all the days of our lives. You see, you were made for wisdom. You were made to be wise. But because of the sin of our parents, Adam and Eve, sin is something that we inherit in our innermost being. Not only is sin something that we inherit, but the prophet Isaiah says that all of us, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has gone to his own way. And the teacher of Ecclesiastes calls these schemes. Our ability, even our desire to choose God and his wisdom has been decimated by sin. In order to choose God, we are even dependent on God to do a work within us to bring about new life and new birth. The teacher looked around and he saw how rare this was. It's a difficult thing to live a life of wise dependence on God. His point about men and women and 1 in 1,000 versus 0 in 1,000 isn't about making a distinction or a difference between the two genders, but to express how rare it is. Man, woman, it makes no difference. Wisdom is rare. It is an easy thing to find foolishness and a hard thing to find wisdom. Wise wisdom, so hard to find. We've said it, and this last verse gives us both the problem and the solution, that God made man upright, but we have sought out many schemes. The reason why wisdom is so difficult to find, the reason the righteous life is rare and difficult is that left to ourselves, we wander. We wander off. God has paved a narrow road of wisdom and righteousness around the mountain, but our hearts keep looking for dirt paths that offer a quicker, easier route, and every one of those shortcuts ends up off the cliff. But you and I were made for wisdom. That's what the teacher says. He made you for righteousness. He made you for wisdom. He made you to image his righteousness and his wisdom. And so the secret to the wise life isn't blazing your own trail. It's returning over and over to the God who made you. Returning to the design that he imprinted upon you. It's returning to a heart of dependence. The humility that we were talking about earlier is very key, because knowing that I'm weak, seeing how easily my heart wanders, that God-given humility is what drives me to depend on him. And all of this, though, leaves us with a question that we can't ignore. If I can't trust my own righteousness because it so easily becomes self-righteousness, if I can't trust my own wisdom because it's shallow and short-sighted, if I can't even trust my own heart because it keeps inventing new schemes and shortcuts, then who is going to lead me on this road? The teacher searched. He looked. He searched for wisdom, and he came up empty-handed. He looked across humanity and found how rare true wisdom is. 1 in 1,000, he said, maybe less. His search ends not in triumph, but in confession. He says, I tried to be wise, and it was far from me. I tried to find wisdom, and I couldn't find it. But the gospel tells us something the teacher could only long for. There is one truly wise man. Not 1 in 1,000, but one for all. There is one man who walked this road without ever wandering into foolishness or hiding behind self-righteousness. There is one who never shook his fist at the Father and said, I would have done it differently. There is one who never sought out his own scheme or shortcut. Where our father Adam hid in shame, our brother Jesus stood in obedience. Where we grasped for control, Jesus entrusted himself to the Father. Where we wander, Jesus walked straight ahead in perfect fear of the Lord. You know, if all Jesus ever did was point at the road and say, try harder to stay on it. If that's what Jesus had come and done, look at the road, try harder, you and I would still end up over the edge. But Jesus did more than give directions, didn't he? He walked the road himself, under the same sun, under the same dangers, feeling every temptation that we feel to veer off course. And then on the narrowest and darkest stretch of that road, the path led him to a cross. The teacher searched for wisdom and came up empty-handed. He lamented that sometimes the righteous man perishes in his righteousness. At the cross, that finally and truly happened. The only perfect man, the only righteous man, the only all-wise man died. But not because wisdom failed, not because God lost control, but so that fools like us, fools like you, and fools like me could be forgiven, could be restored, and brought back onto the road that we were made to walk. On the cross, Jesus took the penalty of the schemes, the penalty that our schemes deserved. In his resurrection, he rose as a living guide for all that would follow him. Jesus doesn't merely stand at a distance, standing by the guardrail, shouting warnings. He doesn't do that. He steps onto the road with us and says, "Follow me," leading us safely to our destination. This is what dependence looks like. Not gritting your teeth, not promising to do better, not white-knuckling the steering wheel of your own life, terrified that you might slip. Dependence is getting in behind Christ and trusting his lead. It is fearing the Lord by trusting the Son that he sent. It's saying, turn by turn, not my will, but your will be done. So friends, stop trying to manage God from the guardrail of self-righteousness. On the other hand, stop pretending the cliff of rebellion isn't really that dangerous. Step back onto the road behind Jesus. You will still feel your weakness. You'll still be able to look over and see the drop. You're still going to feel the sharp turns, but you're not alone. You won't walk alone. The one who calls you is the wisdom of God himself. He has walked this road perfectly. He's borne the crash your foolishness deserved, and now he leads his people safely home. Brothers and sisters, you were made for wisdom. Though we have sought out 1,000 schemes, God has not left us to wander. In Jesus, wisdom has come looking for fools like us. And so, fear the Lord, walk humbly, admit your dependence, and follow him. And as you do, mile after mile on your journey on this narrow road, your heart and your life will more and more look like his. Right here in front of us, along this narrow road of wisdom, is a table with bread and cups. Simple, ordinary elements, and yet for the Christian, they proclaim a profound truth. The wise life is not sustained by your effort, but by Christ's finished work. At this table, we remember the body of the only true, righteous, and wise man broken for us. We remember his blood poured out for all time to cover our self-righteousness and to cover when we ignore him through our sinful rebellion. This meal is for those who know they cannot guide themselves. This is a meal for those who have found mercy in Jesus. And so as you take the bread tonight, as you take the cup, you're not saying, "I'm wise." You're saying, "I need a Savior." We don't feed ourselves. We come, we receive, and we are fed. We come empty-handed to this table, friends, and we're given grace.